member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players, and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment when multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment when multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah, under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress, sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development, and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth, that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah, under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress, sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development, and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings. From the
How do I turn it off? Your Excellencies, honorable guests, and dear colleagues, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'd like to begin by welcoming all of you to the side event organized by the bank's Sustainable Development Goals Community of Practice. My name is Ahmed Faruk Diken, leader of the core team of the SDGs Community of Practice, and I'm delighted to be the master of ceremony for this event. I'd like to begin with a quick introduction to the SDGs Community of Practice. The Islamic Development Bank has been working closely with its member countries to support them in achieving the SDGs. As one of the ways to promote the SDGs in its everyday work, the bank established the SDGs Community of Practice in 2017. We are working along 3 work streams: raising awareness among ISDB staff on the SDGs, promoting alignment of the bank's work with the SDGs, and enhancing advocacy about the bank's work on the SDGs. To achieve these objectives, the bank has formulated 2 main products. The first of these is the SDGs Digest, a copy of which you may have received today on your seats, which is a quarterly publication that highlights some of the work of the bank on SDGs through articles contributed by professionals of the bank as well as guest contributors. The second is the SDGs Open Dialogue, which are high-level seminars with eminent personalities as guest speakers who provide their insights, research, and expertise in the field of sustainable development. We also have this annual flagship event on SDGs, which we organize every year at the annual meeting of the bank. Today, in addition to organizing this event, we're glad to share with you the 17th SDGs Digest under the theme of Accelerating SDGs Implementation During Uncertain Times. Physical copies are available. You may also pick them up on your way out. During today's event, we will be exploring the current context of regressions and disruptions across all of the SDGs as a result of various global crises, including, but unfortunately not limited to, the impact of the pandemic. To have this discussion, we have an excellent lineup of esteemed speakers today, including Her Excellency Dr. Hala Hilmi Al Said, Minister of Planning and Economic Development of the Arab Republic of Egypt and Governor of the Islamic Development Bank. Her Excellency Ms. Oulimata Sarr, Minister of Economy, Planning and Cooperation of the Republic of Senegal and Governor of the Islamic Development Bank. His Excellency Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, who will be delivering the keynote address. His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Mohieddin, Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund and the UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27. Her Excellency Ms. Ahuna Eziakonwa, UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP Assistant Administrator, Regional Director for Africa. His Excellency Mr. Zongjing Wang, CEO of the Multilateral Cooperation Center for Development Finance. And His Excellency Mr. Hani Sumbul, if he can join us due to another conflict. Before inviting our guests to the stage, I have the honor to invite His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al Jasser, Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, to the podium to set the stage for us today and deliver his opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mohammed Al Jasser.
In the name of Allah, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon the most honorable of our messengers, our Master Muhammad, his family, his companions, and the righteous followers until the day of judgment.
Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome all of you to this side event organized by the Islamic Development Bank's SDG Community of Practice. This annual event is a flagship platform to keep our fingers on the pulse of the progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is the primary objective of our institution. Our discussions allow us to identify setbacks and deliberate on remedial actions which can guide our work on sustainable development. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the topic of this year's event, Sustainable Development Disrupted, Advancing Impactful Partnerships to Rescue the SDGs, is a realistic reflection on the current global challenges facing sustainable development. Indeed, we can see and experience the disruptions that various crises exert on sustainable development. The COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent economic and political crises in Eastern Europe and within our member countries have significantly impacted the progress towards achieving the SDGs by 2030, especially in poorer countries. As a result, the divide between the global north and the south is getting wider. According to the UN, the pandemic pushed some 120 million people back into extreme poverty in 2020 alone, reversing years of progress in poverty reduction. Estimates by the International Labour Organization indicate that job growth may start to recover this year. However, this is still yet to be seen across the globe. Additionally, the pandemic has disrupted health systems, with fewer people accessing essential health services. For example, a World Health Organization study found that routine childhood immunizations have been disrupted in 68 countries, putting millions of children at risk of disease such as measles, polio, and diphtheria. Furthermore, those who do not have health coverage are continuously pushed into poverty as they have to pay the costs of essential health care out of pocket. In addition, a recent report by the World Bank has shown that school closures has occurred during the pandemic may have a long-lasting negative impact on all age groups of youth who are likely to lose out on income-generating opportunities in the future due to missed educational opportunities if we do not implement remedial policies urgently. It is also estimated that 1 billion children had no access to education during the pandemic due to the lack of digital connectivity. Furthermore, many of our member countries face significant hurdles in achieving the SDGs due to debt sustainability and macroeconomic stability issues. This is particularly detrimental given the considerable financing needs required to achieve the SDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, it is evident that the pandemic, the ongoing conflicts worldwide, and the impact of climate change are causing severe economic crises affecting people from all strata of society and widening the economic and social divide between communities. To address these challenges, we need to work hand in hand to craft the required policies and take swift and collective action. An immediate step that all development partners must explore is the need for debt relief and debt restructuring initiatives for developing countries. International financial institutions, bilateral donors, and creditor countries all have a role to play in supporting debt sustainability efforts. Furthermore, we need to renew our efforts to increase public-private partnerships, investments, and alternative financing mechanisms such as impact investing and blended finance, which can help diversify financing sources and reduce dependence on traditional debt. Again, we believe that Islamic finance could play a significant role in this regard. Another potential solution is the need for economic diversification. This can help create more stable and sustainable economies and new opportunities for job creation and innovation. Achieving this requires a collective push towards policies encouraging public and private investments in new productive and tradable industries and sectors. It also requires support for small and medium-sized enterprises that are key drivers of economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, our window of opportunity to build back better and create a more sustainable and equitable future for all is closing fast. We are quickly running out of time to address the economic and social consequences of the pandemic and the ongoing crises we face. However, a shared commitment, strong leadership, and swift actions are vital to overcoming our tough challenges and preparing for a resilient and inclusive future. I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas on how we can advance impactful partnerships to rescue the SDGs. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, for the opening remarks. We will now play a short video message from Ms. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, addressing this event before we continue. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, President of the Islamic Development Bank, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for the invitation to address today's side event on Sustainable Development Disrupted, Advancing Impactful Partnerships to Rescue the SDGs. This is held in conjunction with the annual meeting of the Islamic Development Bank. Today's event is an excellent occasion to commend the Islamic Development Bank for their increased level of commitment and ambition to accelerating the SDGs. Over the past several years, the Islamic Development Bank has made a concerted push to align the bank with the SDGs to fulfill the funding gap for humanitarian and development needs, including through the generous pledge of $4 billion to support Pakistan's reconstruction, and through increased engagement with the UN on how to better leverage the potential of Islamic social finance. As we head into the SDG Summit in September, which will mark the halfway point to 2030, we must double down on these efforts while inspiring others to do the same. According to the 2023 SDG Progress Report, of the roughly 140 SDG targets with data to assess progress, about 12% are on track. Close to half, though showing progress, are moderately or severely off track, and some 30% have seen no movement or have regressed below the 2015 baseline. Tighter global financial conditions have further exacerbated the situation in countries with crushing debt burdens. As always, it is the poorest and most vulnerable that suffer first and worst. At current trends, 574 million people, nearly 7% of the world's population, will be trapped in extreme poverty by 2030. Meanwhile, 60% of the world's developing countries are either in or at risk of falling into debt distress, while dozens more are right behind. This is why the Secretary General has called for a large-scale SDG stimulus to provide immediate relief through at least an additional $500 billion a year. The SDG stimulus seeks to tackle the high cost of debt and rising risks of debt distress, massively scale up long-term financing for development, and expand contingency financing to countries in need. Multilateral development banks, at the heart of the global financial safety net, will be critical to this effort, including raising their risk appetites, better leveraging existing resources, and improving lending practices to fully align with the SDGs while adopting a longer-term lens of 30 to 50 years. But the SDG stimulus alone will not be enough. It is high time that we also reform our unjust and dysfunctional global financial architecture, including by giving developing countries a much greater voice in global financial institutions. And so I call on the Islamic Development Bank shareholders to act on the need for transformations for the benefit of all. The Secretary General's upcoming policy brief on reform of the international financial architecture will provide concrete recommendations for reforms, recognizing that the IFIs are critical to creating a more inclusive, equitable, and resilient global economy. This includes efforts to make governance more inclusive and representative, reforming quotas and voting shares, and going beyond GDP and the MDB's business practices, including when determining eligibility criteria. Excellencies, the time to act is now. Let's not lose this opportunity to provide immediate relief to countries in need, while simultaneously progressing much-needed systemic reforms to make the financial architecture fit for the world of today. In this regard, I urge the Islamic Development Bank to be bold and to continue being a champion for this cause. Thank you.
Very grateful for the video message from Her Excellency Deputy Secretary General. Now it's my pleasure to invite His Excellency Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, for his keynote address.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I wish to thank you, my dear brother, President of the Islamic Development Bank, Dr. Mohammed Al-Jassar, for inviting me to speak at these annual meetings of the Islamic Development Bank Group. He and I are great partners. We just finished a meeting before my walking into this. Partnerships are critical to succeed. And I am delighted that the Islamic Development Bank is a strong partner of the African Development Bank in our collective efforts to achieve sustainable development goals, the SDGs, in Africa. Our partnership focuses on co-financing $2 billion in operations by 2024. I am delighted, Mr. President, that we have done $2.4 billion for 19 operations in 14 countries, exceeding our targets and covering critical areas such as agriculture, energy, water, and sanitation, transport, and health. Of course, all these are key areas of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Our work at the African Development Bank Group focuses on 5 strategic priority areas, which we call the high fives: Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life for the people of Africa. The United Nations Development Program, UNDP analysis shows that if Africa achieves these high fives, 90% of the Sustainable Development Goals will be achieved. The high fives, therefore, are the accelerators of Africa's development. And we are achieving impressive results on these high fives. In 7 years, our work has impacted on the lives of 350 million people, including expanding access to electricity, food security, finance from the private sector, companies we invest in, improve transport, water, and sanitation. However, COVID-19, conflicts, and climate change continue to threaten progress and pose significant challenges to achieving the SDGs. The COVID-19 pandemic alone pushed an additional 29 million people into extreme poverty. The rise in energy and food prices pushed an additional 15 million people into extreme poverty. And gains that have been made in education were reversed by the pandemic, which put 288 million school-age children out of school, mainly from poor and rural households. Most importantly, climate change is changing everything. It is rapidly reversing the SDG gains in Africa. Africa, ladies and gentlemen, loses $7 to $15 billion annually due to climate change, which will rise to $50 billion by 2030. The African Development Bank Group is ramping up its support for climate change. Today, we devote 45% of our total financing to climate, and I know, my dear brother, you at the Islamic Development Bank are trying to do 35%, and I think we all should do more for climate, and that's great. We also devote 67% of our climate finance to climate adaptation. The African Development Bank Group has launched a $25 billion African Adaptation Acceleration Program, jointly with the Global Center on Adaptation. I'm glad that we have my brother from Egypt here. As you know, we are helping Egypt to raise $1.4 billion for its Nexus on Water, Food, and Energy initiative, a bold initiative to boost access to water through desalination and wastewater treatment for agriculture. Global partnerships are critically needed to support climate financing in Africa as well as in other developing countries. It is time, I believe, that developed countries fulfilled their $100 billion annual commitment to climate finance for developing countries. I remember my late mentor, Kofi Annan, used to tell me, Akin, the only promises that matter are the promises that are kept. We need global partnerships to provide electricity all across Africa, where close to 600 million people do not have access to electricity. However, huge opportunities exist for renewable energy, as the continent has the largest capacities for solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal. And that is what has informed our launching the $25 billion Desert to Power initiative that will provide electricity for 250 million people, including all across the Sahel. When it is completed, it will be the largest solar zone in the world. And we are making good progress on this with strategic partnerships, including support from France, Norway, and Sweden, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Energy Partnership for People on the Planet, the Green Climate Fund, and the Climate Investment Fund. I look forward to forging strategic partnerships with the Islamic Development Bank. In fact, I discussed with the President just a few minutes ago about this. The OPEC Fund for International Development, the Kuwait Fund for Arab Economic Development, the Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, the Saudi Fund for Development, the Arab Fund for Economic Development in Africa, BADIA, the Arab Coordination Group, and several Arab countries in our quest to help light up and power Africa, especially the Sahelian countries, with solar power. Through the G7 Just Energy Transition Partnerships, we can also advance supporting countries to decommission coal-fired power plants and transition to renewable energy. The African Development Bank, through its Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa, which we call SEFA, is working with global partners to deploy concessional financing for just energy transition with renewable energy. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we need bolder global partnerships to tackle the challenge of food security, where in Africa today we have 246 million people in hunger. Now I know that God did not create stomachs to go empty. He created stomachs to be filled. And it makes no sense that in the world that we are in today, those stomachs are rumbling and going empty. The African Development Bank, therefore, is investing $25 billion over 10 years to help Africa to feed itself. One of the pillars of that is the delivery of climate-smart agricultural technologies to millions of farmers. And to tackle the impacts of Russia and Ukraine war on Africa, the African Development Bank launched a $1.5 billion emergency food production facility. This facility, ladies and gentlemen, is currently supporting 20 million farmers in 34 countries to produce 38 million metric tons of food valued at $12 billion. Partnerships, again, plays a critical role. With support received for the bank from the United States, UK, Norway, Netherlands, and the government of Japan. We are working strongly now to finance the development of special agro-industrial processing zones, to create the infrastructure base to support rapid development of agricultural value chains across several African countries. President Al-Jassar and I just had a conversation in which we agreed that this is fundamental to the economic transformation, structural transformation of African countries. And therefore, I'm delighted, Mr. President, that Islamic Development Bank, the Arab African Development Bank, and the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFA, jointly provided $580 million to support the development of special agro-industrial processing zones in Nigeria. And I know we have in Senegal, we have in several other countries that we are doing together. At the recent Feed Africa Summit, organized by the government of Senegal and the African Development Bank in January of 2023 under the presidency of President Macky Sall of Senegal, 34 heads of state and government attended, as well as the President of Ireland. And they committed themselves to food and agricultural delivery compacts that will help to achieve food security within 5 years. You are there, President Al-Jassar. The power of global partnerships, again, at play. The African Development Bank worked very closely with development partners from around the world, including the Islamic Development Bank, and we have today collectively mobilized $72 billion in support of these food and agricultural delivery compacts. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am confident, more than ever before, that together we can achieve SDG 2 and end hunger in Africa by 2030. We also need global partnerships to unleash the greatest asset in Africa, its huge youth population, the largest in the world, brimming with ideas, creativity, and innovation. The bank is currently working with Microsoft, LinkedIn, and others to establish 130 centers of excellence for computer coding for employment, providing digital skills needed in an increasingly digital world. The African Development Bank, and again our close partner, the Islamic Development Bank, and the French Development Agency jointly launched the $680 million, which we call the IDICE program, which is investing in digital and creative industries to develop youth-based enterprises, create 6 million jobs, and add $6.4 billion to the economy of Nigeria. To further boost youth-based wealth and grow successful businesses of young people in Africa, the African Development Bank and the MasterCard Foundation are currently designing and plan to launch this year what we call Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks all across Africa. And I discussed also with President Al-Jassar and look into how we can partner with you on this. Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing we can do without women. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, women run Africa. We are making progress on SDG on financial inclusion for women. The Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, AFAWA, which we have at the bank, has shown great success in providing access to finance for women. The African Development Bank last year paid out $1.14 billion to women businesses in Africa. We expect to do more to reach our target of $5 billion in support of financing for women. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, much is being done. But we need a lot more resources to actually deliver across the finish line the SDGs, as we heard from Amina Mohammed. We will need trillions of dollars. In this regard, I would like to focus on 3 areas for special attention. First, there is an urgent need to rechannel $100 billion of special drawing rights to Africa, with a share of that, as agreed by African heads of state, going through the African Development Bank. Why? The rechanneling through the African Development Bank will leverage the SDGs by 3 to 4 times. $10 billion allocation becomes $40 billion allocation. $20 billion allocation becomes $80 billion for African financing. I am very delighted, and you know, President Al-Jassar, ourselves, and the Inter-American Development Bank have been working very hard to come up with an MDB option for using the SDRs. And I'm pleased that our MDB option has now received the support of IMF staff as meeting the reserve asset quality required for the SDRs. So now I think it's time now to act. What is actually needed is to have 10 countries to participate in rechanneling the SDRs through the African Development Bank to have this multiplicative effect. And I know we have here several SDR donors, and I would like you to sign up and help and get this across the finish line this year. Second, we must leverage more financing from the private sector. To do so, we must reform the global financial architecture to leverage trillions of dollars into green growth and climate finance. With trillions of dollars in sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, we must deploy at scale risk-sharing instruments coupled with project preparation facilities and project development facilities to deliver bankable projects that can attract investments by institutional investors. Third and finally, we must decisively tackle, as President Al-Jassar also said, the rising debt challenges facing African countries. Africa cannot run up a hill carrying a backpack of debt on its back. It is now time to put in place an African financial stability mechanism that will help to stabilize African economies and avoid the spillover effects of economic and fiscal instabilities facing the countries. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the SDGs will not be achieved globally unless they are achieved in Africa. The challenges should not discourage us. Our progress should inspire us. When we act together in partnerships, we can do amazing things. We acted together and saved the world from COVID-19. Now we must act together and save the SDGs. It took tens of trillions of dollars to save the world from COVID. It will only take, as we heard from Amina Mohammed, $500 billion a year to save the SDGs. We need, therefore, globally effective financing partnerships. Partnerships guided by mutual accountability for a better world. Partnership like the wave of the sea that lifts all boats. Together, let us make our world a better place. Let us move with a fierce urgency of now on the SDGs. The SDGs must never fail, and neither will we. Thank you very much. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your keynote address. I am now pleased to invite our speakers to the stage. Her Excellency, Dr. Hala Hilmi El Said, you can please join us at the stage. Her Excellency, Ms. Olimata Sar, you're welcome to join us at the stage. His Excellency, Dr. Mahmoud Mohieddin, you're welcome to join us, please. Her Excellency, Ms. Ahuna Ezier Konwa, His Excellency, Mr. Zongjing Guang, you're all welcome to join us. And now I'm pleased to turn it over to Dr. Rami Ahmed, the SDGs Envoy and Special Advisor of the President, to moderate our event. Thank you.
Am I on? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We start the discussion. I didn't hear a round of applause for our panelists. Please help me welcome them. Thank you very much for being with us. I guess I cannot set the stage after such two brilliant speeches from the two presidents, President Al-Jassar and President Adesina. So they made my job a lot easier in setting the stage, especially with the nice and inspiring, as usual, messages from Her Excellency Ms. Amina Mohammed. So without really getting into spending any time in setting the stage, I'll try to make the best out of your presence with us. Thank you very much for being with us. It's in very small piece. We have a great agenda, probably the greatest global agenda that the world has agreed on. Yet we are off track. This is in a nutshell. Are we going to succeed, or are we failing as a global development community? I cannot help but remember the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad, saying, إذا قامت الساعة وفي يد أحدكم فسيلة.
If you have a plant and the eternal hour comes, you plant it.
hand of any of you a palm shoot or a seeding, he's able to plant it, then let him plant it. And hopefully, the final hour, we still have some time to do this. At least for the 2030 agenda, we still have about 8 years to do that. So the questions, and I see Dr. Mahmoud starting to smile. So in 7, 8 years, are we going to be able to plant some seeds that will show us some fruits? I don't know. Let's see. So without further ado, I think the stage is set, and I will start from my left with Her Excellency Dr. Hala. She's our governor, of course, and she's a frequent guest with us here in IDB, and she's a global figure when it comes to SDGs. I've seen her talk in global fora, and it's always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much for being with us. And I always try to start with you on a light note, but this time, forgive me. You are in Egypt. It's a middle-income country. Economic hardship is all over the place. And we're following your policies, what you're trying to do, and the struggle that not only Egypt, actually, many of our member countries are going through the same struggle. But seriously, do you see any chance to speak about the SDGs given all this economic hardship? And if you are still able to really sell the agenda of SDGs in Egypt, what type of policies are you doing? How are you adapting with all these economic difficulties? Please feel free to speak your mind, and then I'll come back perhaps with some follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rami, and let me start by thanking the Islamic Development Bank for, of course, organizing this event, for inviting me among this distinguished panelists. And it's always a pleasure to be with you in the SDG community discussions. Well, let me start by saying that we are in a very unprecedented times. We're witnessing, we just came out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Countries were trying to struggle with the COVID-19 pandemic, and when we started recovering, and Egypt has done very well during the COVID-19 pandemic, taking the right policies in order to keep the economy going. We did not have a lockdown at any time. And then when we started the recovery, we were hit with the geopolitical challenges. So this is a situation. Egypt is not an exception. All the middle income and developing countries have been struggling because within these unprecedented times, of course, all the economies have been hit with soaring prices, basically strategic commodities, whether food, oil. When inflation hit high, central banks across the globe started raising interest rates in order to mitigate inflation. This has been more acute in developing and emerging economies, because with this, all money and inflows started flying to where they have a better risk return on their investments. So it is definitely more acute in developing countries. But let me tell you that Egypt has taken very bold steps in this. We always look to difficult times and to challenges as an opportunity. So we have embarked on a structural reform agenda. In 2021, we have launched the structural reform agenda. The structural reform agenda is based on different pillars. One, focusing on the real side of the economy. Egypt is a diversified economy, so we're focusing more on agriculture, manufacturing, and ICT, and having a more export-driven economy. Second, and we're talking about partnership, enhancing the role of the private sector. Definitely, we know that the government and the state has intervened after the period where we witnessed political instability, which was between 2013 and 2017 and 2018. But this is the time where the state is stepping back, and it is the role of the private sector to come and have a more role in the economy. We have done our role as a state in preparing all the infrastructure for the private sector. So we have invested in roads, in water desalination, in electricity, in energy. We used to have energy cuts between 2013 and 2015. So we have invested a lot in our infrastructure. One, to have better quality of life for our people, and two, in order to have this infrastructure prepared for the private sector to step in. So now we have a state ownership policy where we have giving comfort to the private sector to come and invest. We have, in addition to the state ownership policy, we have a committee for the level playing field, and we have established the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Egypt to become an investment arm of the government, whereby it crowds in the private sector through different projects that they look into different investment opportunities. They transform these investment opportunities to investment products, and they offer this to the private sector, basically in green energy, in transformation in utilities, where this is basically more the role of the private sector. The third is the efficiency and efficacy of the labor market. And of course, for the first time, we're looking into the supply side of the labor market, because we are a populous country. We know we're 104 million people. 60% of our population are under the age of 35. So we have although we are a populous country, and this is basically putting a pressure on our development, but we are looking into the demographic dividend of this population. 60% are under the age of 35, so we're investing more in our young people through more technical, more vocational, and more technology into our education. And of course, the fourth, which is the social safety net. And here I'm not talking about what we have introduced before in terms of conditional and unconditional cash transfers. I'm looking into the macro picture of the safety net. For the first time, we have embarked during the COVID-19 on the largest development project, which is Haya Karima, or the Decent Life Initiative. This initiative is targeting improving the quality of life of more than 50% of our people. For the first time, we started mobilizing all the finance from private sector, from civil society, from the MDBs, and from the government. And I here like to stress always, SDGs is not the role of the government. That's the role of the whole society. It's the private sector and the civil society, academia, think tanks. So we're mobilizing all finance from all these partners, and we are pitching this finance in the services in 1,500 villages for the first phase. We're trying to finalize 4,500 by the third batch of this program. For the first time, we are improving level of sanitation, clean water, decent housing, and of course all cultural activities, in addition to providing jobs, because providing jobs for our people is the sustainability of development. Yeah. So this is the first time we are targeting this safety net from this perspective, in addition to the family development program, which we have also launched last year. And this family development program is also targeting the population issue. But we're targeting the population issue from two dimensions. The first dimension is that, yes, we want a birth control because we increase by 2.5 million people every year, and that's a huge pressure on the economy, but we want to invest in our people. So we want birth control from one side, but investing in the characteristics of people from the other side. That's why this program has 5 pillars, and the first and key pillar of this is women economic empowerment. So providing jobs for our for our girls, training them and providing them with different jobs is the main key pillar for that. So coming to our point, to your point, please, we cannot afford to fail. We are committed, and as you said, we are trying to find these challenges. Of course, it is a major challenge that is affecting the whole world, but we're looking to this challenge as an opportunity and working very hard to deliver and to improve on our SDGs.
Thank you very much. As usual, very rich interventions, and I'm glad to hear that Hayat Karima is off the ground. I still remember the opening in a big stadium, and I think even Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin gave a speech over there. So I guess at least 100,000 people in the stadium now are waiting for results, and I'm so glad to hear that Hayat Karima is off the ground and is...
It is, and we're going to finish the first phase. 1,500 villages will be offered the sanitation, clean water, decent housing, in addition to all medical classrooms, everything, all services will be complete by this year, John.
Thank you. Hayat Karima is a dignified life. Maybe we say it in Arabic. Decent life, okay. Well, thank you very much. Maybe in the second round, I'll come back and see you. You heard two inspiring speeches from two inspiring presidents of MDBs who are working in your country. Probably will come back in the second round and get a quick view from you. I move to Ms. Sar. Ms. Sar is also our governor. She's by her own right, she's also a development practitioner in her previous life. So she's no stranger to the development issues. This is her first time with us on this panel. This is an SDGs flagship event that we have on an annual basis. So we hope that this is not your first and last time. So I'm not putting you under pressure, but you're not only representing Senegal on this panel today. We would like to hear from you also the African view, especially in West Africa, being in Dakar and being the Minister of Planning Economy. And your government has adopted an ambitious plan for emerging Senegal, which sets a clear roadmap towards emergence, basically. And with the convergence with all crises, even the theme of our annual meeting is fending crises, and it's no longer crisis, it's crises 1.5 to 1. I mean, would you see Senegal really achieving the roadmap, or do you see that the difficulties and the successive crises that we are having are holding you down? And this is not a political forum, so feel free to talk as a development practitioner, please.
Thank you so much for having me on this panel. And you are right, Senegal has a very ambitious plan called the Plan Sénégal Émergent. That's our national development plan with 3 pillars. 1 is transforming our economies, 2 is investing in human capital, and 3 is good governance and peace and security. And in order to achieve the Plan Sénégal Émergent, Senegal is working on 5 axes. 1 is good policies, so reforming our business environment and having an enabling environment to attract investment. The second is investing in human capital. Our country spends 25% of its budget on education. Third is financing. And financing is a big elephant in the room, and I will come back to it. 4 is access to information and access to markets. And 5 is infrastructure. It's roads, it's energy, it's water and sanitation, it's technology as an enabler. Your question is, are we going to reach the SDGs? We will only reach the SDGs if we manage to put together the coalition of the willing. And I will tell you why. Today, my country has discovered oil and gas and intends to use it to give access to energy to our people by 2025. We would like to do gas to power, we would like to do gas to energy, gas to industry. In order to do that, we have a polarized world that is telling us that we have to go clean energy. Clean energy to respond to climate change that we don't have historical responsibility for. And with our limited budget, we have to invest. Senegal has invested. 32% of our energy mix is renewable. Hydro, and I see the team of OMVS in the room, wind and solar. So we are investing. But we also would like to see a fair energy transition. So that's the big conversation. We cannot spend all our budget on climate adaptation and mitigation. We have to find a balance. On the issue of the SDGs, our country, Senegal, is able to address all the indicators. Data is critical on the SDGs. Countries that don't have data are not able to report on it. Most of the countries in the Sahel cannot. So today, we're just guessing that they can't reach the SDGs. We don't know for sure. We know that the Sahel is the epicenter of violent extremism and climate change, and will require a leapfrog, an acceleration. It will require business unusual, fast track, scale. That's the conversation today. The environment that we are evolving in right now as member states is that our MDBs are more concerned about their rating than the development that is in their name. When we meet them, we talk about financing. They say, I'm a AAA, I would like to keep it. And in order to keep it, I need to have a threshold, a risk, exposure to your country. Senegal is at the limit with all of you, including the Islamic Development Bank. But development cannot wait. You cannot ask us to make a choice between development and climate. So I have a call for action. The call for action is for you as MDBs, as our strong partners, to revisit your assessment of risk and your appetite for our countries. We want you to be different. We want you to be so different from the commercial banks. And in order to do that, we need to work together. When we were in Washington a couple of weeks ago, we talked at length, and Ahuna is here, about rating agencies and their role in Africa and how they're bringing the cost of capital so high for us, dominating 94% of the market. One office in Africa, South Africa. How fair is that rating? Some countries in Africa are much poorly rated than some countries in Europe, yet we are doing much better. So in order to reach the SDGs, the finish line, as the president of the African Development Bank has called it, we need scale, we need business unusual, and we need fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think you're speaking for everybody in the developing world. Just, I'd like to recognize in the audience your predecessor, Minister Amado Hot. Thank you for being here also, since now you're focusing on climate. Africa is responsible for only 3% of the total pollution and the emission in the world. And yet we're asking all these developing countries to behave well when it comes to utilizing climate, to utilizing clean energy. Don't get mad at me, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. Huh? But the North has enjoyed 200 years of inexpensive energy sources, and they were advanced, and they are where they are today because of that. And now we have these developing countries having to behave well and to really abide, and having to pressure MDBs, South MDBs like us to really put up the bill. Somebody else needs to come in with the money also, I guess. Huh? Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Ms. Sarr, really appreciate it. And I'm glad to hear also about Senegal in general. The just transition, by the way, we have a session on Saturday under the G20 flag. Presidency of Indonesia last year did a good job on the just transition. And we will be having, inshallah, a very high panel to address the issue of just transition, and we will have Mr. Amado Hart with us on that panel. So for the audience, if you are around, we would like to have you. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin is also on this panel. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, let me move to my friend Dr. Mahmoud. Mahmoud is a frequent guest on our panels, and he's been a friend of IDB for a long, long time. We're always delighted to have you with us. And if I may start by saying, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin is not only an IMF executive director or special envoy in the UN, or in his previous life, vice president in the World Bank. He's a scholar, he's an author, and I mean, I envy him in the nice word, I mean, the nice sense of the word envy. He keeps taking this train from Washington, D.C. to New York, and he authors books on this trip, 3 hours and a half, 3 hours and a half. Every couple of years, he dish out a book, I guess. But this, I don't know what you have for breakfast, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, but mashallah, he's a very productive person. But let me get a bit serious here. I mean, when you are on this train, I mean, I don't know how many times every year, don't you doubt yourself? Do you ever kind of say, I mean, this global agenda is becoming lip service? Are we really going to achieve these SDGs? All these politicians and heads of states, with all due respects, of course, ministers and everything else, but really deep, deep down inside, maybe on the train, I guess, you're saying, I'm going to the UN, I'm going to listen to all these speeches. Are we really gonna do something, or we have to really break it through and come out of this? Because we, as a development community, professionals, we talk to younger professionals every day. By the way, we have invited some of the younger students from universities who are really interested in development. Are we giving them lip service? Are we giving them false hope when it comes to SDGs? Where do you stand on this issue, if you don't mind?
Right. Thank you so much. I think after your very generous introduction, it's better for me not to speak because that may disappoint many of the members of this panel and the audience. But yeah, as always, you bring very challenging questions, but I'll address it after reacting to the very important interventions by the DSG, by the two presidents and the ministers. We are in a very difficult point in time here, and leaders are leaders for them to be traders in hope. If we are going to give up on the SDGs 7 years before the finishing line, we'll be missing a lot. And we need to consider that many of the issues of big concern, including the crises mentioned by the ministers, are basically because of lack of attention to the SDGs. And if we're not going to be fending crises through partnerships, which is the title of this session, crises will be more. We'll be living in polycrises, permacrises, and catastrophes. So a rule of the game here, we can go to the old good wisdom of the Arab culture and Islamic culture, that درء المفاسد مقدم على جلب المنافع. That it is very much important to prioritize prevention of harm than bringing the benefits. And we have a lot to do in order to prevent harm. The DSG was very much right when she mentioned debt as one of the issues of big concern that we need to deal with, especially for the middle-income countries. The members of the Islamic Development Bank, the members of the African Union, are either middle-income countries or low-income countries aspiring to be middle-income countries, or middle-income countries regretting the day that they became middle-income countries because there is no help for them. There is no access to affordable credit in the markets. And when it comes to some of the MDBs, they reach ceilings when it comes to access to finance. And actually, if you have debt challenge in town, this, unfortunately, will be ahead of everything else, will be ahead of the education that is taken, as we understand now, 25% of a budget of a very important country in Africa, spending the right amount and perhaps more is needed in this direction. So the first thing is basically how to prevent debt crisis. And we need to tackle one important aspect here, which is mentioned by President Adesina about the mix of finance. The 1 to 4, I am assuming here that it will not be 1 debt to 4 debt enhanced, but could be through private equity participation as well, when you are encouraging those countries with surpluses in SDRs. That is going to be a good way of doing it. We don't need more debt, we need more equity participation. We need more participation in risk, we need more participation in return. We cannot really finance debt, finance climate and development
by more debt than what we're in now. The other thing is basically one of the issues of big concern that is not good that the Islamic Development Bank and the African Development Bank didn't fall into that, is basically paralysis by analysis. Some of the MDBs had fallen into some sort of endless discussion about, is it climate finance or development finance? For God's sake, as the two ministers mentioned now, climate finance is development finance. If you are serious, it's energy, SDG 7. If you are serious, it's SDG 2, which is adaptation. If you are serious, it's infrastructure development at large, which is going to be helping climate and development. So thinking of climate as if it's an alternative to development or otherwise, it's basically some sort of misleading way of doing matters. The third aspect of my concern, that we went into endless discussion about what's so-called global public goods versus country ownership. For God's sake, if you want really to be serious about climate, you need to tackle projects at the field level in Senegal, in Egypt, and the rest of the countries here. So any serious attention to climate action, it's about energy, it's about adaptation, just transition, and mitigation. So it's country work, while the global aspect is there. When we talk about health, including what we started up with in COVID-19, yes, it's a global issue of concern, but you need to deal with it from town to town, from a house to house, and from a village to village. So I think here it's about time. And it's good that we have a new president at the World Bank and very strong leadership in the rest of the MDBs and important climate finance and development financing institution, including the Green Climate Fund, and they complement each other. And we remember back in 2017, when we were trying to see what could be the role of the Islamic Development Bank compared to the World Bank, which is financing multiples of the Islamic Development Bank, is basically about this kind of comparative advantage in areas of expertise that could really be enhancing the work. The same goes for the African Development Bank. So it's basically about the spirit of partnership that needs to go back strongly to the MDBs and to stop this crisis that we're in. We are confronting climate finance architecture, because without finance, we can just talk about dreams and aspirations. Without finance, public, private, external, and domestic, we are not going to be achieving any of the SDGs. The DSG was in Latin America just a few days ago. And we know that Latin America is doing much better than other regions globally, short of the Asian markets, of course, and the Asian region. But even in Latin America, 25% of the SDGs are going to be met by 2030 at this pace. In the case of Africa at large, it's much less. Middle East is much less. So we need really to change that. To change that, it's about tackling the 4 problems we have in climate finance architecture. I'll give you just the headlines. Climate finance is insufficient. President Adesina just mentioned, we have the billions, but the gaps are in trillions. And he's doing innovation, leveraging, like the rest should be doing. So this is one area on the insufficiency of finance that we need to tackle. Climate development, we are very much short. Insufficiency. The second one is inefficiency of finance. It is not fair for the minister to go and shake hands with some of the development finance providers, and she needs to wait 18 months or 2 years until the money comes after this shake of hands against the big banners and all that, until you get this. And it's not just the MDB side, it's supply and demand. It's absorptive capacity and efficiency of delivering. So this is about the efficiency. The third is basically about the unfairness of finance. First on climate, it is not really fair at all to ask the developing economies with their 3% that you mentioned in total of Africa to go and borrow, even commercially, to fix the mistakes that were created since the first industrial revolution. And now they are not really even allowed to use cleaner versions or cleaner derivatives of fuel. And the very final one is about the bias against development, bias against the private sector, and bias against adaptation. That needs really to be challenged by providing solutions. The great thing here, and I'm a veteran of this development finance, and I used to see weaker counterparts to the MDBs and the advanced economies coming from developing economies. The good day today, as you see it in this panel and others, that you have in the counterparts very sophisticated ministers with their advisors, knowing what they are talking about. In the past, they would say, well, we agree with you, but it's only the social this or political that. No, we have now ministers who can challenge these models and tell them, you are technically wrong. You are not designing the best outcome for my country, and I have an alternative. And if you are seeking partnership, this is the way to go in order to optimize results. Otherwise, finance will be compromised. If finance is compromised, there is no way to get into the SDGs.
Insufficient, inefficient, unfair, and biased.
Yeah, and we need to fix it.
And we need to fix it. We need to fix it.
From now until 2030, but we need to start yesterday.
And who's better to fix it than a development practitioner who moved to become an executive director on the board of the IMF? My second round, I'll come back to you and to see what
we need to fix the governance for me.
And I will see what the IMF is doing and how you are fixing it as IMF.
Very good. You need to go to that recommendation by DSG Amina Mohammed.
Okay.
I'm representing a group of countries that have only around 2.5% of quota. And we are not equal in the boards, but
That's
we are
true.
mobilizing ourselves, coordinating across the board with my good friends as well from the World Bank and the other MDBs in order to enhance our good voice there, with good support and good prayers.
Inshallah, lots of praise. We'd like to put Dr. Mahmoud on the spot, but this is really, maybe in the second round, we'll come back to the SDR channeling and the unfairness and all of this and how we can really get back to the ministers. And when you were speaking, I testify that two ministers on my left were going like this all the time, so they agreed with you all the way. So, thank you very much. I move to Ms. Ahuna from the United Nations, the UNDP. We're delighted to have you here also with us for the first time on behalf of Mr. Akim Steiner, who was not able to come, but we really appreciate your presence with us. The UN is really the mother, the queen of these SDGs, and they fostered this, I say, historic compromise of creating the SDGs after 7 million consultations, I guess, making sure that everybody is included. It's a great, agenda. And it's a historic thing for us. This is the first time, I think, in 70 years that the world has looked and spoke the same language. But listening to these three distinguished speakers before you, I will ask the same question. I mean, how do you see the progress towards the SDGs? You guys in the UN, I've seen the energy with Ms. Amina Mohammed speaking all the time, and I always try to look into her eyes and see, I mean, is this lady giving up on this or not yet? And now, could you give us a feel from the UN body? I mean, how do you see this SDGs unfolding? You're preparing for an SDG summit, I think, in September for the General Assembly. What's the pulse inside the United Nations on the SDGs, please?
Thank you very much, and indeed, greetings from Mr. Steiner. He very much wanted to be here, couldn't make it, but is here with you in spirit. I think not just the three who spoke before me, but the three who spoke earlier, the distinguished speakers, that have really said, I think, most of it in terms of your topic here. I want to congratulate ISDB for putting a topic like this at the heart of this debate, because I think that making the SDGs a part of your core business is really what makes this institution attractive for an organization like UNDP, and we very much value our partnership with you. The first thing I would say is that the UN still believes very strongly in the SDGs. And actually, if we look at the topic of this debate, the SDGs are not the ones that need rescuing. Multilateralism needs rescuing. I think the SDGs remain solid, firm, relevant. They have stood the test of time. And perhaps their adoption in 2015 was looking at multilateralism at its best. It was humanity at its best. Really, all these hundreds of countries coming together and agreeing to these 17 universal ambitious goals was quite an achievement, right? And I think if we can just replicate that spirit of 2015 today, we will get there. Because humanity, human beings are perhaps the most resilient, the most determined, the most ambitious species that you can think of, and we have survived many things in history. This is a low-hanging fruit for the world, and particularly as we're living in moments of wealth, in moments of new technologies, digital and otherwise, that can help us get there faster. So for us in the UN, we're investing in hope. I think there's this strong anchoring of the SDGs in this hope that is expressed everywhere that you go, in our young people, in our science and technology, and in what multilateralism could become, but it's not right now. And I want to sort of make a couple of points in reinforcing what's already said earlier. The first is we need a differentiated lens on the SDGs, and in terms of where countries are at. We're not all in the same boat. Every country is at a different stage of its development. If you're in Yemen today, what do the SDGs represent for you? We must consider and interrogate that. If you're sitting in Burkina Faso, or in Mali, or in Chad, are we speaking the same language about the SDGs? There are countries whose preoccupation, it's about today's survival. And we must consider what the SDGs would mean for them in terms of achieving them. First, you need to stabilize these countries. We need to make sure that we're investing in stability, because there is no achieving the SDGs if what is unfolding in your country is war. If you are sliding into conflict in the Sudan today, what are the prospects of achieving the SDGs? Sure. So that's the first one. I think we need to have a differentiated lens. If you're sitting in Comoros, an ocean country with limitations in terms of your logistics, what would achieving the SDGs mean for you? So the push that we are thinking about has to be done based on the context that we're in. Look at Saudi Arabia. It is a country today that has the mental space to enact a Vision 2030, almost fully aligned to the SDGs, and well on its way to achieving the SDGs in terms of the mechanism that it has put in place, but also the fiscal space. But look at the fiscal space of some of the countries. So all the financing that's been spoken about today, the imperative of financing, whether domestic or international, but also the issue of justice. And I want to end perhaps with this, that if we were to think back and wonder if we didn't have all the disruptions that we had today of COVID, of climate change, would we have achieved the SDGs everywhere? Probably the answer is no. And the reason that answer is no is because of the fundamental injustice that exists in global governance, whether it's of the financial architecture or of the political systems that keep some countries begging in situations where they are on their knees and constantly begging. Mr. Mahmoud talked about fairness, justice, and inequality. I think these are things that need to be tackled if we're going to get there. And that's why this whole rescuing of multilateralism is quite crucial. The president of the Africa Development Bank talked about the SDRs. That's just one expression of the level of inequality and injustice that we see in our system. When COVID hit, where did the money go? To the countries that needed it least. And today we're talking about how this needs to be rechanneled to countries that need it most. And through credible institutions like the African Development Bank. Why is that not a low-hanging fruit? Because that bank is able to reach those countries that require the push to get there, to accelerate. We have other institutions on the continent that are credible and well-positioned for other resources to be channeled through them. So if we tackle injustice, if we tackle inequality, if we tackle this unfairness that we see, I think we will be singing a good song about the SDGs by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really like the combination of hope and realism in your tone and the way you put it. SDGs don't need to be rescued. It's the globalization or the multilateralism that need to be rescued. This is really, we need to have a differentiated look at the SDGs from a country perspective. Countries are different. And I like the issue of hope. I think somebody said leadership is really about, a leader is a dealer in hope or something like this. And I hope the United Nations continue to play this leadership role in really keeping the flare alive, basically, to keep the hope alive. So thank you very much. I cannot resist but address the issue of the SDR. President Adesina mentioned the SDR. There is a reason we kept you in the middle, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. We'll give you more time to come back to the point. But when things happened, the advanced countries or the developed countries issued, basically just, they printed about $17 trillion. And the entire developing countries probably did not reach $1 trillion, less than $1 trillion. The IMF came back and they issued 640 billion SDRs. 650, that's even worse. And the one country got 100 billion of this. And the entire Africa, I guess, got like 30 or 40, 33. 33. And I mean, in fairness, there are initiatives now to rechannel some of the SDRs, but some are seeing it as a charity. Some are seeing it as, we're rechanneling this for poor countries and stuff like this. Perhaps in the second round, you can say a few words, Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin. It's kind of a sensitive issue, but we in the developing world, we cannot just continue to look at this and say, thank you very much for rechanneling some of the peanuts that you are printing in the basement. So that basically, that's the issue. This is the talk in informal circles in the development community. I'll come back to this. Probably we're running out of time. They are telling me there is another event at 1:30 here. They need to prepare the stage, but I will not do justice to the private sector if we don't get Mr. Wang to speak, and then I'll come back with a quick round for all the speakers. They talked about the private sector. They always talk about the private sector. There are two views. Private sector are saying they are not really serious. Governments are not moving with the right policies and the right incentives. From the other side, people are saying private sector is about maximizing profit. Okay, you want some SDGs? We'll give you some SDGs as part of the political correctness. We'll look good as a corporation. We'll look good if we say that this is part of the money that we set aside for social responsibility activities. They want us to put an SDGs flag, we'll put an SDG flag. But at the end of the day, private sector is about maximizing profit. So where do you stand in this? And please introduce your organization also, since this is your first time with us, and we are so happy to have you with us here. Please, go ahead, Mr. Wan.
Well, thank you very much. And I would firstly like to say I'm very delighted to be invited to this panel. ISDB is a very valuable partner of MCDF. We would like to strengthen our partnership with you, bank, with the other development partners in today's discussion. So I would like to say the question is quite relevant to us because we are a very newly established financing mechanism with the purpose to promote SDGs by high quality infrastructure and cross-border connectivity investment. Given our mandate, I would like to focus on how we fill the gap of private financing for infrastructure which is holding back many SDG targets. Indeed, private investment is essential to fill the gap of infrastructure. We think it's very important for us to help private sector to fill this financing gap. According to the data released by the World Bank, although there has been good recovery of private investment after COVID-19, it is still not sufficient to fill the financing gap of infrastructure to support SDGs. There are two major reasons behind this, and I'm very delighted to say MCDF can support to address both of them. The first reason is the poor policy environment. I think some panelists and the speakers already mentioned that. This poor and weak policy environment raises risks and lower the commercial returns to the investors. As you said, private sector are demand-driven players in the market, right? So those unclear regulatory framework and policies, insufficient tariff, or a lack of variability gap support from the government make infrastructure investment not attractive. So we would like to help to address it by supporting technical assistance and capacity building programs that can help government to make some improvements. For example, we are partnering with the African Development Bank to support enhancement of the trade portal and make market access to private investors, as well as streamline the customer system to facilitate trade between the East Africa community and Asia. Another example I would like to put forward is we are now working with the World Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to host the workshop series on sustainable financing for development and infrastructure. We will introduce two specific sessions for private sectors. One is the PPP modality, another one is the blended financing. The second cause of insufficient private investment is the issue of lack of bankable project that investors could be confident to invest in. So from our point of view, we think financing gap is not only an issue of lack of money, but also an issue of lack of bankable projects. So we partner with 12 international financial institutions to directly address it by providing grant financing to support capacity building and project preparation. Up to now, we already supported 6 project preparation and 4 capacity buildings with 2 international financial institutions. And half of the project preparations goes to promote co-financing between FIs and other investors, including Abu Dhabi Fund for Development, China Exim Bank, and Brazil Development Bank of Minas Gerais. So we hope through this effort we could provide more support to private sector. Another example I would like to put forward is we recently accredited the Africa Finance Corporation, AFC, as one of our implementing partners. AFC is a catalyst of private sector-led infrastructure in Africa. Through working with AFC, we would like to directly support private sector investment for sustainable purpose. So let me stop back here. I would like to say we are very new financial mechanism. We are small, but we believe with our partners we can contribute to the bridging financing gap to achieve SDGs.
Thank you very much. This is a very important role. Very important role and very crucial in any successful partnership. I'm pressed for time because we have another major event. They need to prepare the room. So let me come back in the reverse order for 1 minute each, please. Ms. Ahuna, if I may ask you just about this $500 billion stimulus that the DSG just mentioned. Could you just say a few words? This quick round will be about money, so be prepared. Yeah. So let's very quickly, in 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I think the $500 billion that the SG has called for at the G20 is really, it's a stimulus, right? You know, because it's recognizing this crisis, poly-crisis that many countries are facing, which is constrained the fiscal space that's required to achieve the SDGs. So it's like a very small step in what I think the DSG said. It's not going to make the miracle happen, but at least it will give that push that countries need. And let's get there first. And then maybe in terms of last statement, I think from our perspective, you talked about hope. We really want to see the challenges as opportunities, particularly in the space of climate change.
Sorry to interrupt, but is this thing real? I mean, how far are we into actualizing concrete creation of this stimulus? How far are we into this?
Well,
have you received any pledges from countries? Have we seen anything? Are we saying we are at 20%, 30%, or we still, it's a call for action yet?
It's a call for action.
Okay.
And yet to be seen if it will be fully realized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, if you can address, you mentioned your constituency is representing 2.5% or something of the...
Yeah, with a bit of exaggeration as well.
But the point is, people look at the IMF
yes.
as a major player into changing the international financial architecture. Mm-hmm. I happen to sit in this Sherpa meetings of the MDBs. They have forums and they meet twice a year. Yes. But really, I mean, the money or the policies are within the IMF. This is rechanneling SDR, people who keep hearing about the, IMF invisible hands in changing the destiny of countries. Could you address this in 1 minute?
Sure. I'm just reminding everybody that I'm an executive director out of 24. I'm not the managing director, and I'm not the spokesperson of the IMF. This is very much important when you deal with the IMF, just to see how the matter is disciplined there. I'll go about it in this practical way. Getting from your point on hope and how that is going to be translated into governance, and what I'm expecting from President Adesina, President Al-Jasser, and the rest of the MDB's heads to address the issue that of a call of action by the Secretary General before the end of this year. Because if we miss the many important summits coming ahead, that would be really a great loss for the SDGs. So, who said this issue of hope and leaders as traders in hope? It was Napoleon who said it. And then somebody else said, hope is a dangerous thing if we're not really prepared for. But we are from the Ummah that were advised by our Prophet that تَفَاءَلُوا بِالْخَيْرِ تَجِدُوا, that we need to hope for the best, then we will find it. But this is basically based on work, hard work, collaboration. So how is that going to be translated into action here? First, in the area of governance that the DSG mentioned, that for many of us, in the MDBs cannot get a fair share in getting some of our advice even realized because of that quota-based kind of argument for institutions which were established back in the 1940s in a completely different world when the majority of the developing economies didn't even have a vote there. This world now is different, and we're expecting change of governance. If we have that, SDRs will be better allocated from the very beginning. Issues related to fairness in matters related to surcharges. Our economies are against having a levy when you are in debt to pay extra. So that will be translated into action if we have this kind of a fair share in voice in these institutions, which is about reform. So the call for action, actually, that goes back not because of COVID, not because of Ukraine war, but the Secretary General goes back to 2019. When he said we are not on track to achieve the SDGs, and because of the fact that we are not on track to achieve the SDGs, we are going to be seeing disasters and crises. We're not preventing health crisis because we're not on track on SDGs. We're not resilient enough. There is an interesting conversation happening in the back there. we're not resilient enough to accommodate the problems of the Ukraine war because we're not on track to deal with the SDGs. So the only way to go then into action is basically about those three elements that were mentioned in different ways. First, prevention of harm and debt, because that was the first pillar of the Secretary General call for action. The second is the 500 billion. The second is the 500 billion as a critical minimum, and that needs to be supported as demonstrated in Sharm el-Sheikh by having climate finance supporting development finance. And the very final thing is to have contingency funding against anticipated and anticipated shocks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wonder if such a discussion takes place in the whole rooms of the IMF. If this is happening, great.
Absolutely. And in the G20 and in the summits that are going to be happening in June in France and in September in Kenya, and the three important summits in September at the margins of Anga, these are the opportunities to get these kind of pushes for action realized by the leaders.
We need to speak up in these forums, all of us actually, and I think this is where we can make some progress, inshallah. Thank you very much. Two ministers in front of me, people are killing me because the next, so can we conclude with 1 minute each, your final thoughts, especially on financing and financing gaps? Ms. Sar.
So thank you so much, and I will be very quick. In order to influence the financing, you need to talk to the people who are at the head of it. We need to speak to Congress. When we were in Washington a few weeks ago, we realized that the conversation about SDRs is not only going to be at the IMF. You need to talk to Congress, you need to talk to the Treasury. We need to understand that middle-income countries, as we rate them today, are middle-income countries with no middle class. They are middle-income countries where the prosperity is not shared. In order to move the needle, we need the coalition of the willing. Today, the financing conversation needs a reform. As you know, we are building up to the meeting in Paris on the 22nd of June. The new, they call it the new pact for financing. It's an important meeting with the G20 and the President Macron on how do we finance emerging economies. That conversation will require at the table the private sector, the MDBs, the governments, to be able to address the financing gap and actually matching the supply with the demand, because the big conversation was there's so much money for climate, there's so much money for development, but how do we do the matching? We are saying that you are not fit for purpose. The MDBs are not fit for purpose. The MDBs today are worried about their reputation. I remember meeting some organization, now their rating is on their business card. If you're worried about your rating, that you are not taking risk, and therefore you're not addressing the issue of development.
Thank you very much. This is very crucial. Are we enslaved? And I think this is a question for people like President Adesina and our president, others. Are we enslaved to this rating, AAA? How can we really make the shackles go off? I don't know. Not for now. This is just food for thought. Thank you, sir, for being so patient with us. Finally, I'll be very quick too. I know we're very tight in time.
Well, basically, with all what has been said, and of course, we have been 3 years in the decade of action, and I think with all the challenges that the whole world is facing, in order to move forward and to achieve some positive impact on the SDGs, finance is key. Finance is a key element for the positive outcome for the next 7 or 8 years. But the international financial institutions and the whole MDBs have to realize that the developing and middle-income countries, we cannot sacrifice with development in order to achieve climate finance or climate transformation in our countries. Because with all what has been happening, most of the middle-income and developing countries came out of the COVID-19 with soaring debt levels. So we cannot continue having more debt. We need to have the MDBs and financial institutions to support middle-income countries with more equity finance and with more investments. Developing and middle-income countries have all the ingredients. We have the sun, we have the wind, we have the resources, and most importantly, we have the human capital. While Europe are aging countries, we are very young population. So we need the support. It's a win-win. It's not a matter, they have to look to the issue, it's a win-win situation. They are not providing us with support for our benefit, but it's a win-win for the developed and for the developing countries.
Thank you very much. 30 seconds?
Less.
Okay.
On the win-win, for negotiators, with the tough negotiators from advanced economies and rich countries, three cards you need to use. One is what was just mentioned by the honorable ministers about the gains of being more efficient, the win-win. And some sensible guys will address that and accept it. The second card is basically the argument of fairness. And here we need really to have the civil society with you, you have the NGOs. The third is a legitimate card, the fear factor. Because if we are deteriorating better, if we are not funding crises better, many people will be knocking on your doors as forced migrants and as refugees, and you will be losing opportunities more and more. You need to mobilize the three of them in one. Good luck.
We'll keep the three cards in mind. Well, thank you very much. And I hope you get rated a AAA by our constituency as MDBs. Mr. Adesina, thank you very much for your inspiring speech earlier today. And thank you, ministers, Dr. Mahmoud, Ms. Huna, Ms. Wang. Really appreciate it. Please help me thank the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
The next event is the ICT Poverty Alleviation Forum, Combating Poverty Through Solidarity, Alliances, and
Center of one of the most magnificent civilizations on the face of the earth that has inspired millions of people all over the world, from where vision and perseverance have turned dunes of sand into an iconic land of productivity and modernity. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace and headquarters country of the Islamic Development Bank, is actively supporting ISDB in inviting ministers, policymakers, economy and finance leaders of its 57 member countries, as well as private sector chiefs, international development players and global partners for the 2023 ISDB Group Annual Meetings in the iconic city of Jeddah. Under the patronage of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, for yet another exhilarating high-profile assembly at a crucial moment where multifaceted crises are looming. An assembly that builds on the collective will to spearhead homegrown and climate-friendly progress, sets the stage for a more resilient and sustainable development, and forges lasting partnerships that fend off crises. To lead partnerships that pace up the move towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to better manage the present and better sustain the future for all. Join us in person and online for 4 days of proactive deliberations at the 2023 Islamic Development Bank Group Annual Meetings.